Hey, I'm Felissa Rose, and you're watching Keto and Crime.
Hey everyone, welcome to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. In 2020, I did a two-parter on the Chris Watts case, the senseless murder of his wife and two little girls. And I did as much of a deep dive as I possibly could. I got a lot of information, including their finances, which I believe contributed to the murders. And so what I've done is combined those two episodes into a almost hour and a half length video for you here. I hear you guys when you say that a lot of you listen to me while you're cleaning the house, while you're working, while you're driving. So you need a little bit of a longer video so you don't have to keep, looking for something else. And I used to drive a lot, so I understand that. So I listened to you, and I just wanted to combine these into a longer video for you. The two shorter videos do remain on my channel, along with a review of the Netflix movie about the murders. Those will be in a brand new playlist called The Watts Murders, which I will link in this video. And with that being said, let's dive in. And as always, this video is brought to you by our brand new full channel partner, Keto Krime. The wonderful folks over at 𝐲𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐼.com have officially signed on to partner with me in both my weight loss journey, which I am back on now, as well as sponsoring the channel. They have signed me up for a brand new affiliate program. So if you click the link down below, as well as put in my discount code, you'll receive 15% off your first order, and I do get a tiny commission if you do purchase. So it helps the channel and you get something tasty and healthy. These are great bars. They satisfy. They keep you full for a long time. They have a lot of great nutrients, a lot of great natural ingredients. And for those of us in the keto and low carb world, we've often been demonized as not a friend to the animals. But these are 100% plant-based. So you can feel good about that too if you are of the vegetarian or vegan keto lifestyle. These are also for you. So with that being said, I want to say a huge shout out to Keto Krime for sponsoring the channel and helping me to stay on the air here. And thank you all. So if you'd like to order some, definitely check them out below. I appreciate it. The Watts case. This is one that I've actually put off for a while because there's been so much coverage about it, but I finally dove into it by popular request, and here we go. Christopher and Shanann Watts.
Suspect killed his wife and two young children. It's believed all of their bodies have now been recovered. Earlier this week, search dogs were here at this home as investigators try to figure out what happened exactly in the home behind me.
Seen for the first time as a murder suspect, Chris Watts in court emotionless, facing charges of killing his family. The victims, his pregnant wife, Shanann Watts, and their daughters, 3-year-old Celeste and 4-year-old Belle.
For the sake of keeping this organized, because really the information that I found is all over the place. I read several books. I watched a lot of documentaries. I watched a lot of other YouTube videos. I went back and listened to a lot of the interrogation recordings. So the information did not come in a sequenced way, if that makes sense. So I'm going to break this down into 5 different parts. Number 1, background of their relationship, Chris and Shanann, and as much about their individual backgrounds as I could find. Part 2, a presentation on their finances. We know that one of the number one causes, in fact, the number one cause of marital trouble in this country is, as Dave Ramsey would say, money fights and money problems. So I will be going over their finances, including their bankruptcy, their financial picture around the time of the crime. That will be part 2. Part 3, I will go over the months leading up to the crime. Part 4 will be the actual crime itself. And part 5 will be the days after the crime up into the actual pleading of guilty and sentencing. So that's how we're going to break it down. I will divide the parts so that you will know exactly. I will try to remember to put timestamps for everything down below, as well as all my sources. So let's get started with the background on Chris and Shannan Watts. Christopher Lee Watts was born May 16, 1985, to Cindy and Ronnie Watts in Spring Lake, North Carolina. Shannan Cathryn Watts was born January 10, 1984, to Frank and Sandra Watts in Aberdeen, North Carolina. Backgrounds on both of them. Chris was a good student. He was active in sports. He did date. He had several girlfriends in high school, but not really anything serious. He did date a couple of girls after high school, but nothing that really led to marriage or long-term, settling down. He was an avid mechanic, a true gearhead. He loved cars. He loved everything to do with cars. So his dream was to become a mechanic and eventually to become a NASCAR pit crew mechanic, and that's a true mark of somebody from the South and North Carolina, I'll tell you. So that was his goal in life. Shannan, average little girl, very sweet, did very well in high school, excelled at things of the business nature. She wanted to be in business, and specifically business for herself, and she excelled at sales. In fact, a lot of her early careers were sales oriented, and she did really well with them. As far as we know, this was Chris's first marriage. But Shannan was married prior to Chris. In fact, in 2002, 2003, and this information comes from a Colorado Bureau of Investigation interview with her first husband, Leonard King, who was a South Carolina attorney. They married around 2002, 2003, were divorced by 2008. Now, according to Leonard, and you can find, all you have to do is Google this, you can find this interview online just like I did. It wasn't the happiest of marriages. They did not have children. Leonard wasn't really interested in children, even though Shannan wanted to be a mom more than anything, but unfortunately Shannan had fertility issues. So there was a huge amount of strain on the marriage. In addition, they moved a lot. I'm not sure if that was due to him or her, but they moved approximately 7 times over the course of their marriage, and that's a lot. They bought a house. I could not find any information on whether that was foreclosed on, but they did at one point own a house, and Shannan actually owned a house by herself. I could not find any information on whether or not that was foreclosed on or what happened there. While married to Mr. King, Shannan became very unhappy, and according to Mr. King, just like had happened toward the end of the Watts' marriage, she became very quiet. She threw herself into work. She worked at several sales jobs, but right at the end of the marriage, she actually started working for a custom car and engine business known as Dirty South. This was owned by a Middle Eastern gentleman in the Carolinas. Now, there wasn't really a whole lot of information on him. I mean, you can find his name if you're so inclined. All you have to do is Google Dirty South, Shannan Watts, and you'll be able to find. But I didn't feel any need to actually bring his name into it. But Shannan was the store manager, so she knew a lot about mechanics. May have been one reason that her and Chris, kind of hit it off a little bit. But she was mainly in charge of sales, and she did quite well at it. But the problem was that Mr. King suspected that Shannan was having an affair with her boss, and that did help lead to the dissolution of their marriage around 2008. Also, Dirty South was sued. I could not find a whole lot of information on why, if it was misappropriation of funds or if they had swindled some clients, but Shannan was, according to this, part owner, and Shannan King was named along with the owner of Dirty South in the lawsuit. I could not find any information on how that ended. I suspect it was probably settled out of court, but you can probably find information on it if you're so inclined. So after the dissolution of her marriage with Mr. King, she moved back to North Carolina and actually met Chris in 2010 via Facebook. Now, Shannan by this time had been diagnosed with lupus. She had had a long history of strange ailments and things like infertility. She also suffered with fibromyalgia. She also suffered with severe migraine headaches and hypoglycemia, All these things can be attributed to the disease known as lupus. And lupus is an autoimmune disease, which basically your body's immune system attacks its own vital organs and attacks the joints. So in most people, it presents as a red butterfly rash on the face and as severe arthritis. But unfortunately for Shanann, hers seemed to attack her reproductive organs. It attacked her thyroid and her liver and the ability to regulate insulin. And so as a result, she had fibromyalgia, she had fertility problems, and she had severe migraine headaches and issues with blood sugar. So she was quite a sick lady, and as a result, had racked up a whole lot of medical bills even before she had met Chris, and had spent a lot of time in hospitals. So she was kind of at her lowest point when she met Christopher Watts via Facebook. According to her own story that she told via Facebook Live, she didn't think too much of the friend request she got from Christopher Watts. She just kind of blew it off, didn't really want to accept it, but eventually she did. And they started talking and eventually decided to meet at a restaurant. They did. Now, Shanann was attracted to very fit men. Chris was quite overweight when they met. He also was kind of quiet, an introvert to Shanann's extrovert. And according to friends that knew her, she wasn't too impressed with him. But he kind of stuck by her and continued to be just a friend to her. In fact, there was a story that she told on Facebook where she fell asleep on him, and he sat there and let her sleep as long as she needed to, even though he had to go to the bathroom. And to her, that was like a huge indicator how much he really cared. In fact, her mom, Sandra actually told her that God, they were very religious families, a lot of families in the South are, that God had sent him to her and she better hang on to him. So Chris was welcomed into Shanann's family. Also, their personalities tended to mesh well because he was an introvert, her being very extroverted, very driven, and also kind of controlling. A dominant personality, if you will. Now, this was nothing new to Chris because Cindy, his mom, was very much in charge of that marriage and that relationship, at least from what I've gathered from interviews and from the stories and things that we've read online. I understand that Cindy was kind of in charge of that marriage. So Chris more than likely grew up in a very matriarchal household, at least when it comes to behavior and things like the finances and things like that. So he was used to that. And so it didn't really bother him that Shanann was leaning towards that way. However, even though Shanann's parents welcomed Chris and were quite happy with him, it was exactly the opposite for the Watts family and Shanann. Cindy Watts has often been quoted as saying that she thought Shanann was controlling, a gold digger, and since Chris was an auto mechanic, he made good money, was working toward that goal of being a NASCAR mechanic, and she said that she was a gold digger, manipulative, and kind of a hypochondriac. This would come to a head later on over the girls, one of the Watts little girls, with Cindy, but Cindy believed that all of Shanann's medical problems were psychosomatic and in her head and not a real thing, so she kind of had a habit of calling Shanann a hypochondriac. Now, I have a real problem with that because I was raised partially with a single mom, and I was a highly allergic and asthmatic child. I'm still highly allergic and asthmatic, and I had a lot of medical problems, and certain sides of my family said the same thing about me and my mom. So I have a real issue with that. If they've been diagnosed with something, they're sick. Unless you live with it 24/7, you don't know. So if Cindy really did do that, bad Cindy. So Cindy was absolutely against the marriage, but Chris did man up and marry Shanann. They married in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, November 3rd, 2012, according to online court records. Everybody attended the wedding except the Watts. They boycotted the wedding, so that was a real nice beginning for this young couple. It wasn't long after they married that Shanann wanted to move out west to Colorado. She thought it was good for them to get away from both their families for a little while and just have a fresh start. A lot of bad memories in North Carolina. I can understand why. Cindy and her husband, Ronnie, were not happy. They automatically started accusing Shanann of trying to rob Chris of his dream of wanting to be a NASCAR mechanic, because to be able to get into NASCAR, you're a lot more likely to do it if you stay in the South. NASCAR is not that big of a sport out west or even in the Midwest. So they automatically accused Shanann of robbing Chris of his dream in pursuit of hers. But they did move, and Chris was able to continue being a mechanic, though not on the level he wanted. He did become a Ford certified mechanic at Longmont Ford. Shanann held a couple of jobs when they got to Frederick, Colorado. After she became a teacher's aide for a little while, and later worked in billing at a children's hospital, also doing sales at Longmont Ford, and was pretty good at it from what I understand. And then just before the crime and the main meat of this story, she did get on with 𝐜𝐚𝐬 selling Thrive health products. Now, 𝐜𝐚𝐬 is a multi-level marketing company, otherwise known as a pyramid marketing company. Some people call it pyramid scheme. Now, I will say this at first. Most MLMs are only good for the people that get in early or get in early in a specific geographical area, because you make a whole lot more money recruiting more people in than you do ever selling their product. But the thing of it was, Shanann was good at it. She, you start with one person and then they build a team under them and then they build a team. So it does shape like a pyramid. Well, Shanann did quite well. She was just the type of person that could sell it well, and she eventually worked her way up to close to the $70,000 range for 𝐜𝐚𝐬, and that's extremely rare. Most of the time people lose money getting into multi-level marketing, and they certainly don't make a whole lot of money. So she was one of the good ones. She was one of the rare ones. I did check out 𝐜𝐚𝐬's website. They do have a pretty generous commission. It's along the lines of 20% commission for sales, and then 8 to 10% for those under you that sell. So the commissions are pretty generous with 𝐜𝐚𝐬. A lot, and they're also, I applaud them from actually putting their stuff online. A lot of these MLMs like Amway, even Avon, Mary Kay, any of the essential oil companies, they really don't put their commission structure online readily available. 𝐜𝐚𝐬 does, so I do applaud them for being transparent like that. They also have a program for top performers where they will provide $800 a month toward any car that you might want, or $1,600 a month toward a luxury automobile like a BMW, a Mercedes, or a Lexus, which was the level that Shanann had gotten to. Now, before we get on into the crime, I'm now going to take you into my financial presentation, because it wasn't all smooth sailing in Colorado. They got out there, they essentially bought a house they couldn't afford, and they got themselves into a peck of trouble when it comes to finances. And I think that led partly to the tragedy that we're going to cover. So let's get into their finances, shall we? Hey everyone, welcome to the financial background portion of this video. Let's dive into it. I have used a variety of different sources, including official court sites, court documents, websites, calculators, everything that you would need to come up with a reasonable snapshot of what the Watts' financial situation, both in their past, their recent bankruptcy from the time of the murders, and then their financial situation at the time of the crime. So I think this bears a lot of reasoning and sheds a lot of light on why the murder may have happened. So let's get into it, shall we? So after Shanann and Chris moved to Colorado just after their wedding in 2012, they both got work, from what I can gather, at Longmont Ford, which is a Ford dealership in nearby Longmont, Colorado, just a few miles from Frederick. Chris worked as a mechanic and Shanann was a salesperson. We would notice that as we go back and look at their income, that the income varied a whole lot. For example, when they actually filed their bankruptcy in 2015, when they had to, submit their income, I found out from court records and other sources that their income was actually falling year to year, just up to their 2015 bankruptcy. For example, in 2013, they made a combined income of $147,256,000. Now, I'm going to gather that's Chris's salary from being a level 2 auto mechanic, because he was a mechanic, not a technician, and Shanann's probably having a good year as a salesperson. So I'm going to gather that that was probably the reason for the good salary in 2013. Then we see in 2014 their income falling to $90,789. Now, I can only gather that perhaps Shanann had already changed jobs, because she went from selling Ford. She also had a stint as working at a school as a teacher's aide, and later on in the local children's hospital in the billing department. So that may have been after she changed jobs, while Chris's income was staying pretty much the same. He pretty much remained at Longmont until he got his job with Anadarko. And finally in 2015, their income had fallen to a whopping $40,491 combined. Now, I have question marks there simply because I don't know. I suspect that it was because Shanann had changed jobs. We know that she was working at the Children's Hospital at the time of their bankruptcy, making around $2,900 a month, and that he was still working with Longmont Ford. Now, how did I calculate the salary for what they made? Well, I actually found it stated straight out in a bankruptcy document that she was making $2,977, but it did not mention him. So we don't have any evidence that Chris changed jobs before Anadarko, and we don't have any evidence that he was making pauper's wages there. So we have to assume he was a decent mechanic, probably at a higher level than a normal technician. And so I simply went to Ford.com, or the Ford company, and looked at what a certified mechanic would make, and it was approximately $25 an hour was the average. So that's what I put in there, and it could also be more, because at dealerships you don't just make an hourly wage based on the hours that you work. You also make an hourly wage on about how you do your work. There are bonuses, and if he was also working as perhaps a service advisor, he would make money based on the work he could sell, such as if somebody came in for a oil change and he told them they also needed an air filter, he might make more money for that. So I was very generous, and I gave him an average of $4,000 a month. That's based on 160 hours. That's an average 4-week, 40-hour-a-week pay period month. So that's how I got that. But if you look at the salary that they were making in 2015, it's half of what he was making. So I can only assume maybe Shanann had taken a lot of time off from work for her illness, because by this time, I mean, they had Bella, who was 12 months old at the time of their bankruptcy. So I can only assume that perhaps Bella was really sick, or Shanann was having some flare-ups of her lupus and was taking a lot of time off from work, or perhaps it was just kind of a down year and Chris was only getting part-time hours or something, though I can't see that happening, in 2015 at a Ford dealership in Colorado, because, Ford trucks are going to be a selling point. So that's just my estimate, but I can see here that everything's starting to fall. And this is perhaps also maybe she was starting to look into 𝐜𝐚𝐬 and starting to put some money into 𝐜𝐚𝐬, and that's the reason for the drop. But as you can see, the income was steadily going down year to year, and that resulted in their 2015 bankruptcy. In 2015, Shanann and Chris filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy protection under the Consumer Code of Colorado. This is the claim. These are the items they claimed at that time. They claimed $448,820 in debt. The bulk of that would be their home, which would be well over $300,000 of that. They also claimed assets of a 2006 Ford Mustang, which was Chris's, valued at just over $8,000. Their wedding rings valued at $1,000, and a dog, their little wiener dog, which we've seen in some of their videos, valued $1,000. Now, under the Colorado Bankruptcy Code, and my source was coloradobankruptcy.com, Colorado does allow debtors to hold on and to keep making payments on large necessary assets like a house and a car. We do know that Chris sold his car once he went to work for Anadarko because he got a company vehicle. So we do know that that Mustang was sold and probably applied toward the bankruptcy. But pretty much everything else was wiped clean. A Chapter 7 is one that pretty much gives you a fresh start. It wiped out everything but the house, and pretty much wiped out everything but the house. They had consumer debt, credit cards, medical bills, and this bankruptcy wiped out everything but the house. Now, because they were only making $40,000 a year, I actually wondered why they would choose to keep a house they obviously couldn't afford. I mean, you've bought a house that's worth $400-something thousand on, you know, an average salary, below average salary. $40,000 for a couple in Colorado is very below average. So I don't even understand why the court allowed them to keep the house, but they did. But it wiped out, now keep that in mind, it wiped out all their debt except for the house. And Chris did, we know, sell the Mustang, which I assume was put towards paying on the house, or maybe putting in savings or something, I hope. But anyway, in 2015, Chris, Shanann, and Belle were wiped clean. Of course, you know, Belle was part of the family at this time, was wiped clean of everything but their home. So let's see how they've now gone from a bankruptcy, which should have given them a fresh start, to being back in debt at the time of the crime in 2018. What did Chris and Shanann's finances look like at the time of the crime? So we're looking at just after their bankruptcy all the way up to when Shanann died. So first, let's look at their income. They were a 2-income household, and I have it broken down here. Now, I found out Chris started Anadarko Petroleum in 2015, so probably just before or just after the bankruptcy. I believe Anadarko was the employer of record listed for him on the bankruptcy sheet. But at Anadarko, he was a field specialist, a oil well specialist. He walked around, he fixed various things at the oil fields and things like that. So he was a mechanic of sorts. But I found out he was making $5,400 a month gross income. Now this would fall in line with everything that we've read, because it said he made somewhere in the $60,000 range. So that would be $60,000 if you do the math and multiply that out. But I'm going to do it real quick. 5,400 times 12 would be $64,800. So yes, that falls right in line with what we've been estimating, that he made somewhere between $60,000 and $67,000. So he was bringing home, not bringing home, but had a gross pay of $5,400 a month, which that's going to be taxed both at the federal, and Colorado does have state income tax at just over 4%. So I estimated with him taking probably, you know, more exemptions than the average, because they did have 2 children. I'm going to estimate that he paid about 20% in taxes out of his paycheck every month. And that may have been a little bit less, but this is really only taking into account federal. There's also state on top of that, and possibly a Denver city tax since he lived near Denver. I'm going to say he was paying a cool 20% of his income toward taxes, which would be about $1,000 a month. And that also includes, you know, other incidental taxes that may be in there. Now, we do know that he did sell the Mustang, so he only had his Anadarko work pickup truck. Now, the truck was part of Anadarko's fleet and was technically only for business use, but I did dig into Anadarko employee benefits and was able to find that they will allow their employees to use the trucks for personal use if they pay a fee that would take care of liability insurance and additional wear and tear on the truck for personal use. And Chris was doing that, so he was paying approximately $140 a month for the personal use of his Anadarko truck, which is not real bad for a vehicle, if you think about it. Now, I believe they took care of insurance and things like that, though he was probably still responsible for his own gas for personal use. They probably had a fleet card for work use, I would imagine, but I'm sure he had to very carefully log that, and anything he used for personal use would probably be debited from him. Now, I am most convinced that their health insurance and other benefits came through Anadarko, since Shanann worked was pretty much an independent contractor. I work as an independent contractor myself, so I do know that the health insurance would have had to come from Chris. Now, I did, again, thumb through Anadarko's website. I was able to find a PDF of their benefits and found out they had a very generous offering of different health insurance and dental insurance is available. Now, I have no way of knowing what Chris actually took, but I'm going to guess, having paid insurance for a family before myself, I'm going to guess that it was probably about $400 to $500 a month for family coverage. Most of the time, a large company, especially like Anadarko, would probably pay in full for the employee, and then it would be tiered based on how many other people were added to the policy. With Shanann and 2 little girls, I'm assuming he was probably going to be paying between $400 and $500, so I decided just to go with an even, kind of in the middle of the number of about $440 a month is probably what he was paying for health insurance for the 2 girls and for Shanann, and that would be going up soon with the birth of Nico because you would add an additional child to it. So again, all of this is whittling down that $5,400. I'm going to assume he was investing in a 401k of some sort. He might not have been, but I'm going to guess he was investing a cool 3% of his salary, $162, which I assume Anadarko probably had a match, and I would advise anybody that has that to take advantage of it. So altogether, his take-home pay, by my estimations, would be about $3,578 a month out of that $5,400. Now let's look at Shanann. We do know definitely by 2018, she was working for 𝐜𝐸 selling Thrive, and that is an independent contractor, independent sales position and recruiting position. So everything she made was 100% commission off of her and the other people that she recruited. We do know she was very successful with 𝐜𝐸, and it was one of their top performers. And we've also heard estimates that she made close to $70,000 a year. So I kind of went in the middle of that and represented her at $5,833 a month, which brings us right to about $69,996 a year. So that would be her gross. Again, she's going to have to pay taxes, and if you make commission, sometimes your taxes are a little bit more. I've done HR and payroll, so I can tell you that sometimes commission sales is taxed a little bit. Now, you're probably saying, well, she's an independent contractor. She probably didn't pay her taxes every month, and that's quite true. But she's going to end up paying her taxes, whether it's every month, every 3 months, on a quarterly basis, or whether or not she waits to the end of the year to settle up. I now work as an independent contractor. I settle up at the end of the year, and it's always quite a chunk of money, even with deductions. So I'm going to say she's still going to end up paying about 20% of her income as taxes. And remember, there's also Colorado income tax, so Colorado state income tax. So I'm going to die on this hill and say that she paid around $1,166 for taxes. Maybe that wasn't paid every month, but it will be paid. Now, as far as her transportation costs, which she didn't need much because she worked from home mostly, she had a Lexus, white Lexus SUV provided by 𝐜𝐸. They paid the $1,600 a month lease, as well as all the insurance and everything else. She only provided gas for it, so she really had a sweet deal with her SUV. And I found that out from looking at the 𝐜𝐸 website and seeing their vehicle rewards program. You could get either a normal, what we call a non-luxury vehicle, a Honda, a Chevy, for $800 a month. They would lease it for you if you were over a certain tier of sales, which she definitely was. And then they would also pay $1,600 a month for a luxury automobile like a Lexus, a BMW, a Mercedes. And we all know that Shanann would take the luxury automobile, because she earned it, and also putting on that Thrive, that image of thriving and being successful was very important for her sales. So she would drive the most extravagant vehicle she could, and so the Lexus. I'm going to assume she was also putting 3% of her income aside for retirement, so that would be $175. She may not have, so that may actually go back, and that left her with a take-home of just over $4,400. And how did I come up with the taxes? I simply used a calculator and figured 20% of their gross income. And bear in mind, Colorado also has state income tax of 4%, so even if I'm off on the federal, Colorado state is going to definitely, make that up in that amount. It might even be a little bit more. Now, of everything, here's probably one of the most telling: their debt obligations. First and foremost, I went to their county tax assessor's office and was able to find that they bought their house, the one that the crime occurred in 2013 for $392,709. It would now be worth well over $500,000. It was worth well over $400,000 when the crime occurred. Now, I was also able to find from those same records they made approximately a 7% down payment, which would be $27,489.63 they put toward the home. Now, they would have 28 years approximately 28 years left on their loan at the end of their bankruptcy. I'm going to gather that they probably had an interest rate of about 7.5% because they're not going to be an absolute a prime borrower. One that is top tier because of their past credit problems. Even in 2013, they had even though they had a decent looking over six-figure income, Shanann also had issues with past divorce, medical bills that were overdue, things like that. So they're not going to be top tier credit that would come in at 4 or 5%, which interest rates were around 5%, 5.25% was a good interest rate. I know I refinanced my own house around that time, and that's the interest rate I got. So I'm going to put them right in the middle of 7.5%, which that's the interest rate I had when I bought my first home many years ago, which was actually a decent interest rate at the time I bought it. In 2013, it would be the second tier of credit, which I'm going to gather that's probably what they got. I could not find any official documentation, so it could be off. So how did I come up with their monthly payment? Well, I simply took the purchase price of the house, subtracted their down payment, and came up with a $365,219 balance left on the house. I used a basic mortgage calculator, put in their interest rate of 7.5%, put it in as a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, which is the most common, and it gave me an estimated monthly payment of just over $2,500, which you see here. Now, a lot of mortgage calculators will also estimate in taxes, property tax broken down by the month that will go into an escrow account, which will be paid at the time of your mortgage, as well as homeowner's insurance. This particular calculator did not, so this is literally just the mortgage payment with interest. So $2,554 was coming off the top of their combined income every month right away. And then the breakdown of what they were paying for everything else. Their mortgage, $2,554 a month. Property taxes in the state of Colorado is 0.65%, which would leave them with a payment of $1,830. So that would be added to their mortgage payment. Insurance, I'm going to estimate, was between $75 and $100 a month, homeowners, so I'm going to put that there. That would not include car insurance. That would be another line item further down. We're going to estimate that even though they had bankrupted a lot of their medical bills, they had already started to gather more medical bills from unpaid amounts from their health insurance for the girls and Shanann since the bankruptcy. Now, insurance will only pay a certain amount. There's still co-pays, there's still deductibles, which is a percentage of the total medical bill you have to pay, a total out-of-pocket. Most policies have a set amount you have to pay out-of-pocket for medical expenses every year, and I'm sure they were hitting that every year with the amount of medical treatment both girls and Shanann had to have, as well as another round of fertility treatments for 𝐼𝐸, who was not born at the time of the bankruptcy. So everything they paid for Bella's fertility and Bella's birth would have been bankrupted in that original bankruptcy filing. However, they were doing fertility treatments for 𝐶C that sadly by most insurance is considered an elective procedure, so they would have had to pay for that out of pocket. So they had medical bills still. So they had $100. They were paying probably $100 a month. That's probably the minimum they would have to pay to keep those from going to collections. They had maxed out credit cards. I don't know exactly how many they had. I'm going to assume that, like the average family, they had 2 each. So they had probably 4 cards. I know from using credit cards in the past, they probably had an average interest rate of about 20%. And I'm going to assume that the minimum payments they had to make probably totaled to about $500 a month. Probably the biggest line item, besides the mortgage and property taxes, would be tuition at the Primrose Erie School for both the girls, which was a private daycare / preschool. I visited their website. It didn't really flat out say it, but then I looked into other records and found out that their tuition is roughly $25,000 a year for 2 children. So they were paying $1,000 a month for each of the girls to attend there. So that's just over $2,000 a month. We're going to estimate that Chris's personal use gas and Shanann's gas for personal use would be about $200 a month. Eating out. Now this is Chris. Chris ate out pretty much every day. He either went to a convenience store or he grabbed fast food for lunch and sometimes breakfast every single day. And that could easily top $10 a day, which wasn't very frugal. I know he was upset about the private school and the medical bills, but you know, I can understand those a little bit better than eating out every single day when you're broke. So, but I'm going to estimate he paid about $250 for being able to eat out. Now, taking Nikole out, cheating, is that next line item. He's probably spending anywhere from $100 to $200 a month. Now, she said he used a lot of 𝐜𝐸𝐸𝐿 gift cards, so that's probably a little inflated on my part. So you can take about half off that if you want to. He rarely used the credit cards, though. He always paid in cash or with 𝐜𝐸𝐸𝐿 gift cards. So, but he was spending money on Nikole. That we do know that. Car insurance, which I'm sure they had to keep a certain amount of insurance on both vehicles for personal use. So I'm going to estimate that's probably $100 a month. Now, groceries, I am severely underestimating groceries. Frederick, Colorado, the Denver area is a pretty expensive place to live. It's also a very health conscious area, so there's going to be a lot of organics and things like that. I estimate they were probably spending $850 a month, but I have a feeling it's probably more like $1,000 to $1,200. But I was generous here and said they were spending about $850. I think maybe the reduction was probably because Chris was eating out a lot, but still, I think I vastly underestimated that. But we're going to go with that. Utilities, internet, gas, electric, water. I'm going to estimate they were paying about $550 a month, and then entertainment would be about probably $100 a month. Now, the only thing I did not put in here was cell phone, but I'm going to estimate that's probably an additional $100 a month. So let's look at the final answer. Their take-home pay combined was just over $9,000, $9,411. Total payments of everything that I just showed you was just over $9,300, $9,392, which left them a whopping $19 left over at the end of the month. Now, I did not count the following, which means that they were actually probably going in the hole every month. They might have had a higher credit card minimum payment. Their groceries, I probably underestimated. They were being sued by the homeowners association of the house because they had not paid their homeowners association fees in several months, so they were being sued. They also were known to have already missed about 10 mortgage payments on that house, so they were, struggling to keep the house. I'm sure Shanann was having to put money back into 𝐜𝐸𝐿 because that product isn't free. And I also didn't take into consideration if she had a down sales month. If some members of her team quit, which happens a lot because it's a multi-level marketing thing. She also had to buy her own product. And their property taxes were going to be going up each and every year, which would raise what they had to pay on that because, home values rise. And as well as the cost of insurance, both their health insurance and 𝐜𝐸𝐸𝐿 would, go up a percentage every year, as well as their homeowners insurance. And then I also did not take into consideration what Chris would be paying and Shanann, because Shanann, as a self-employed person, would be paying the self-employment tax, which includes the employer's portion of Social Security and Medicare, which would be about roughly 6% of her total pay. And then I also did not take into consideration what Chris was paying, which would probably be an additional 3%. And on top of it, I did not take into consideration cell phone and other incidentals that may come up. So I think we can see here that each and every month they were going in the hole. They were not able to meet their monthly bills and were probably having to use credit cards or skip payments on certain things, putting them even further in the hole. And then on top of it, they were paying for things like vacations, the Aspen trip that Shanann had paid. Even though Shanann took a lot of work trips, I'm sure there were still expenses associated with that, as well as, the 5 weeks she spent in North Carolina. I'm sure they had to buy their own tickets and things like that. So there was a lot of incidental travel and stuff like that I wasn't putting in here. But I think we can estimate they were broke, and as a result, they had a lot of stress. And I'm sure this kind of built up to their marriage crumbling and then what happened. So now I'm moving on back into part 3, which we're going to talk about the events leading up to the crime, June 2018 to August 2018. We'll be adding some additional names in here, namely Shanann's Lavelle work friends, such as Addie, Nikki, and a few other people, the ones that she texted a whole lot, letting them know what was going on day to day, because she really did spill a lot of personal information to people. And that's fine. We all do it. And then also we will introduce Chris's mistress, Nikole Atkinson, during this portion as well. So I hope you enjoyed my little brief financial presentation on just how stressful things probably were. This is why they were being sued by their HOA. This is why they probably didn't make their full mortgage payment every month. They really mishandled their bankruptcy. If I'm going to go so far as to file bankruptcy, I'm going to get a fresh start. And they didn't. They basically ran their bills back up. So they were caught in that vicious cycle that a lot of Americans are in. And it could be a very stressful thing. But Mr. Watts, most people don't kill if they just divorce and file bankruptcy again. Is basically what happens. But anyway, there you go. Let's go get on into part 3. So, having covered their finances and seen what they were making at the time the crime occurred, as well as their past bankruptcies and how there had been a lot of fluctuation in their income, you can see how that could have led to a lot of marital discord. And as a result of their finances and a result of Chris kind of being loosey-goosey with his spending, as far as every day, he ate out every day, as I said in my presentation, whether it be McDonald's or a burrito at a gas station. He ate out just about every day. Shanann was a little more reserved, working from home, eating most of her meals at home. She was a little more extravagant with things like spending money on Lavelle, which you have, as I mentioned, you have to invest into it. You can't just, they don't send you that product for free, and you have to keep so much of it on hand. So she did invest a lot of their money back into Lavelle. She also, I think, was the major reason why 𝐼𝐸 and Belle were in a private preschool, which I don't understand. It's basically a daycare. They're going to go to kindergarten eventually. So I think spending $25,000 a year on that was probably more along her ideas. But you can see they were going in the hole every single month. And as a result, Shanann, completely being the controlling person that she was, and I don't mean that in necessarily a negative way, she was just kind of the alpha of this situation. She kind of took over the finances and kept Chris on a tight leash when it came to money. He had a certain amount he could spend, and she monitored his credit card charges closely. Also, when she started working for Lavelle, she started living on Facebook. Let's put it that way. When you do multi-level marketing or direct sales like that, you have to stay connected with people, and you have to stay in the public eye, and you also have to look the part. So because they sold Thrive products, which were vitamin packs and nutrition shakes and things like that, they had to look like a fit Colorado family. So she kind of put Chris on a diet and encouraged him to lose weight. He started lifting weights and had lost about 45 pounds. She also monitored his Facebook posts. He couldn't post anything without her okaying it. In fact, she often wrote his Facebook posts and made them a lot about the family. In fact, she lived on social media. I mean, there are so many Facebook Lives, so many pictures of her and the family going to Lavelle conferences and filming things like when she found out she was pregnant. She put that on Facebook in a very cute little video.
We did it again. I like that shirt. Really?
Really?
That's awesome. So pink means...
That's just the test.
I know. It just says the pink is going to be girls.
I don't know. Just the test.
That's awesome.
And she often monitored Chris's posts and wrote his posts, so he was posting a lot of the same things. So Chris started to get kind of resentful and kind of felt more like a beta than he ever had in his life. And I think it was here, along with the stress of the finances and not knowing what was going to happen, because they were in an untenable situation. There was no way they could keep that house. There was no way that they could ever have a future unless they drastically cut down on their spending. But because of Shanann's career and they had to look a certain part, he didn't ever see, you know, them being able to take the girls out of the private school or downgrading the house. And so I think both of them were under a lot of pressure. And then here's a third baby to feed. Now this one, according to all records, little Nico that Shanann was pregnant with at the time of her death, was not a fertility treatment baby. They had their other two children, little Celeste and little Belle, as a result of fertility treatments, and that added to their medical debt, as we have discussed. But Nico must have been a total either surprise or a planned baby that they just got lucky with, but anyway, he's on the way, and now here's another mouth to feed, and, you know, another private preschool bill coming on. So I think maybe from his part, Chris saw this as a situation that he could never escape from. And I'm sure Shanann did too, though Shanann put on a much better face than Chris did. So during this time, Chris was becoming more and more resentful, and he started to look outside the marriage for solace. On his side, he was telling people, both at Anadarko and people that he talked to, that they were looking to separate, he and Shanann. So people on Chris's side didn't think the marriage was going to last. Where over here, Shanann was so happy about the baby and telling all her friends. Many of her friends worked for Lavelle too. In fact, they were people she had helped bring in. And so she was telling them the exact opposite until she wasn't. And we'll find out later, she started to suspect a lot of things going on. But one of the major things that some of her friends talked about was when Chris was losing weight and getting buff, they suspected maybe he was having an affair. Shanann's excuse for this was, nah, he's not having an affair. He doesn't have any game. Now, I don't care for Chris Watts. I think what he did was evil. Divorce was a much better option 100 times going on than what he did. But I also think Shanann was kind of at fault, not for her death, but for the state that their marriage was, because it just seemed that she didn't think a whole lot of Chris. She maybe still had that attitude that he wasn't quite good enough for her, even though she did love him. I believe that, but I think still in the back of her head, she always considered him maybe to be a little subpar. And if she was putting out that I don't think he could have an affair because he doesn't have any game, he was probably picking up on that. And guess what? He went off and started having an affair. He met Nikole Atkinson at Anadarko's main offices there in Colorado. Nikole was an independent contractor working for a company that did occupational health and site health for petroleum companies, and she was assigned to Anadarko, and she became acquainted with Chris when his team would come in before they went out to their assigned sites to do meetings and, you know, briefings and other things. And she became acquainted with Chris first in the hallway, and all of this came from not only other research, but also the transcripts of Nikole's conversation with Frederick, Colorado Police and Colorado Bureau of Investigation, where she said that they met in the hallway, they met in the break room, they would have conversations. She didn't really think anything of it. She said it was about 2 weeks into them meeting in June before he ever mentioned he had 2 kids, and he finally told her he had 2 kids. He showed her some pictures, and then when she asked about his wife or his girlfriend, he said, I do have a significant other, but we're in the middle of a separation. We're getting ready to separate and sell our house. So again, Chris was telling a very different story to the people that knew him than Shanann was to the people that knew her, or at least that face that was putting on. So Nikole said that once she saw things kind of going a more personal route. She immediately wanted to take it out of Anadarko, and they started hanging out after work. They stopped using their work phones to communicate, and they started hanging out at a nearby park at first. This was late June, early July. And then they also started hanging out a lot at Nikole's house, because she didn't really want to go to Chris's house, knowing that he still had a wife that was there. And the one thing, major fact that Chris left out of everything with Nikole, that his wife was pregnant again. There was a few stories that said he told her later, yes, she was pregnant, but it's not my baby. But everything that Nikole said in her transcripts, and you can find the recordings here on YouTube, led to believe that he didn't really tell her about the baby until she found out about it toward the end and, sought to end their relationship. So anyway, she said that they never really argued or fought. They were both into fitness. They were both into working out. So they just genuinely got along, and both of them had a healthy sexual appetite. So according to Nikole, they were having sex up to 4 times a day. Now, that's a lot. Wow. Oh, also one very important fact, and this was brought up by not only Nikole, but other people at Anadarko. Chris never wore his wedding ring. He always said it was so that he wouldn't lose it while out on the oil well. I guess that's believable, but Nikole said she never saw it on him, even in the office. So, just an interesting fact there. So, they're hanging out, and then we approach one of Shanann's many trips. For the month of July, last of June, 1st of July, into a little bit of August, Shanann had planned a trip back home to North Carolina to take the kids and visit her family, his family, and just generally have a vacation. And Chris wasn't going to join them until the last week, the 5th week of that vacation. So before she left, Shanann fixed up, some snacks and meals for Chris and froze them and put them in the pantry labeled with his name. She did, everything as if a loving wife would do. And, kissed him goodbye and said she couldn't wait till he got out there for the last week of the vacation, and she took the kids to North Carolina. Now, once she left, according to texts that Shanann sent her friends, like Addie, like Nikole Atkinson, Chris turned distant and cold about halfway into their trip. When she first left, she said they were having phone sex. They were communicating as if everything was okay in their marriage. They were going to work on it. But then about halfway into it, he kind of turned, became distant, wouldn't answer her texts. And they had some pretty telling text conversations wherein he admitted to her he didn't know if he wanted the 3rd baby. He just didn't feel the same about her anymore. And so the text between her and her friends that had been so happy at first during that trip turned nasty. Also, the trip revealed that the rift between the Watts family and Shanann would probably never be healed, because there was an incident with the youngest baby. There was an occasion where Cindy had taken the girls back to the house to spend some time with them and their cousins and everything. And she knew very well that both the girls had nut allergies. Celeste, the youngest, Celeste was the most, little Cece was the most allergic. She had a severe allergy to tree nuts. That means all tree nuts, not just 1 or 2 of them. And that Bella probably also, according to the doctor, had some allergies too. But Cindy bought and fed them pistachio ice cream. And as you can imagine, or tried to feed them pistachio ice cream. And when the girls both knew they shouldn't have nuts and they wouldn't eat it, and told their grandmother they wouldn't eat it, well, instead of just going to buy nut-free ice cream, which she should have had in the house with 2 allergic grandchildren, she got angry and started texting Chris, telling Chris that Cece and Bella need to learn that they don't get everything that they want, and that Shanann is turning them into a hypochondriac just like her. Of course, Shanann immediately went and picked up the girls and went back to her house and immediately texted Chris that he needs to check his mother. He needs to find his balls, was his exact word, and stand up to his mother. Okay, so there's an even greater rift starting to form. As a result, both of the Watts unfriended Shanann on Facebook. I don't know how much more petty you can get, but if that was their reaction, then both of them were both Ronnie and Cindy were very petty. So, and also, girl, why would you, if you love your grandkids, why would you have nuts of any kind in your house when they're there? You can eat them all you want when they're not there, but they come to visit you maybe once or twice a year, and you're going to try to kill them. No. Bad Cindy. Don't come for me. Now, bear in mind, all this is allegedly, even though there's texts and stuff. I mean, when it comes to arguments, we know one side, and in the middle, somewhere in the middle, there's the truth. But I can only go on what the information that I can find. So that just created a bigger rift in the whole family situation. Meanwhile, while Shanann is in North Carolina, and Chris is getting more distant, and now the spite with his family, he's getting ever closer to Nikole. According to Nikole, she only went to the Watts house twice. One was on the 4th of July, where she helped him set up his MyFitnessPal. She said she stayed in the front room, sat on the floor, helped him set that app up and everything according to it. And then they immediately left and went to her house. He did show her the basement where he, while Shanann was gone, had set up a bed to sleep in the basement. So it's like they were together, and then Shanann left and went to North Carolina, and he moved out of their bedroom. So all of this was coming to a head. I don't know if he did it because of Nikole. I suspect she was a catalyst. And then the second time she went to his house on the 14th, she did see a picture of the family, and she said she actually tried to convince him to try to make it work with his family. You know, beautiful, there's an '80s song, beautiful house, beautiful wife. Why don't you try to make this work? And he asked, well, what about us? She said, don't worry about us. We'll be okay. Now, those are her words in her interview, but then there's also internet searches from the time they met at June till the crime was committed, that Chris was searching for how soon to tell a woman you love her, one. And also, Nikole's internet searches were things like wedding dresses, and then will a married man leave his wife for a mistress? All kinds of things like that. And then Chris, later on, in letters written from prison, would say that Nikole was putting a whole lot of pressure on him, especially when he finally told her about the baby. She was disappointed and said she wanted to give him his first son, while in her interview, she was saying that it really wasn't a big deal. It was casual. She could take it or leave it. Now, again, there were texts to back up both of these stories on each of their phones. But the thing of it is, Nikole, when she heard about the crime, started deleting a lot of information off her emails and her phone when it came to Chris. So a lot of that was probably lost, let's be honest. So who's telling the truth here? I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think she did want him to leave Shanann. I don't think she wanted him to kill Shanann. But I do think she was disappointed that another baby was on the way. Anyway, according to her, Chris told her that he was going out for the final week of their vacation to North Carolina, and he would try to work it out with Shanann. So she went home after they ate a lunch. She said a grilled chicken and carrots, which she said was very weird. Only food in the house, he said, which kind of counterpoint. So I think maybe Chris had a problem with lying. I really do. But anyway, she went home, and Chris flew on out to North Carolina to spend the rest of the vacation with his family. Before he left, though, he set up a secret app on his phone that to the naked eye looked like a calculator, but within that app, you had to have a secret code to get into it. There was a message folder where he kept all the stuff with Nikole, naked photos of them on the camping trip they took while Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina. They went to one of the national parks near Frederick. And so lots of pictures, lots of intimate texts. All of that was moved from his normal phone to this calculator app so that no one else could access it. Now, remember, this is still a young relationship. They only met in June, and the murders happened in August, and Shanann was gone essentially for a month of that, leaving them alone. So it was really easy for Chris to hide this relationship from Shanann. But anyway, He goes out to North Carolina instead of trying to work on it like he supposedly told Nikole. He was cold to Shanann. He wouldn't sleep in the same bed with her. He would not touch her, according to Shanann. And Shanann's text to her friends, which you can find online, I'm not going to rehash all of that because it's very easily online, reflected that she was very upset, thinking that her marriage was ending because of his distance. Before they left for North Carolina to come home, Shanann actually booked an Aspen trip for her and Chris, I believe the 17th through the 19th. She was going to get a babysitter for the kids and just go with him to Aspen to try to rekindle their marriage. So Shanann was still very hopeful that this marriage would make it, because she confessed again to her friend that she didn't think she could raise 3 kids on her own and keep up with her Lavelle job. But I got news for you, girl. You could make it. And anyway, now let's get into part 4, the actual crime. All right. They're home from North Carolina. It's now early August, and Shanann and Nikole Atkinson are scheduled to go to a Lavelle conference in Arizona, and Chris is going to take a couple of days off work and stay with the girls so they don't have to leave them with anyone. So Shanann leaves out on August 9th to go to Arizona. Chris took off work on Friday, August 10th, and kept the girls at home. There is a logistical trip that was plotted by the GPS on, remember, Chris's truck that he rented from Anadarko, though it was a work truck, that because he paid $140 a month, he could use it for personal travel, and it was equipped with a GPS because it was part of Anadarko's fleet. So the GPS easily tracked Chris's route the entire time that the saga was unfolding, and it showed him going to a store parking lot and meeting an Anadarko co-worker to give him an Amazon Fire Stick that Chris had sold him. About that time, his co-worker, Cody Roberts, texts him about a potential leak at Anadarko Site 319, which would end up being the site that the family was disposed of in. And Chris automatically volunteered to check it out and to take care of it Monday morning. In fact, on Sunday the 12th, and Cody Roberts was quoted as saying he thought it was very strange because Chris never radioed anyone at work over the weekend, going back to the fact that I don't know if Chris was entirely happy working in the petroleum industry, though it was really good money, and said, hey, just wanted to remind you, I'll take care of that leak at 319, and so there's no need for 2 of us to go. And Cody said he was appreciative, but was just also, it was weird that Chris reached out to coworkers about a job on the weekends. On the 11th, Chris called a friend and asked if his daughter could babysit Bella and Celeste. He wanted to go to a Colorado Rockies game with some friends from work. However, this was untrue. He did get the babysitter, but however, this was untrue. He actually had a date with Nikole, and Nikole later in her interview would say that Chris always paid for their dinners either with Anadarko gift cards, because they gave their employees lots of perks, and among that was gift cards to some of the more popular restaurants in the area. He either paid with those or he paid with cash. She never once saw him charge anything on a credit card or a debit card for them, and which led her to believe he was, of course, hiding this from his wife, or even though she thought they were going into separation. A lot of weirdness here. But they actually went to the Lazy Dog Saloon and spent around $62, and he did put it on their joint credit card. Immediately, I'm talking the next day on the 12th, and Chris did not get home until after 10:30 at night, which far after the Rockies game would have ended. So Shanann immediately texted Chris the next day, because she kept that close a watch on their credit card statements, and asked him how he spent $62 at the Lazy Dog Saloon. And he said, oh, I just went with some friends before the Rockies game, and I had salmon and a beer. Well, Shanann not quite buying it, and this is just so weird. She actually checked the menu for the Lazy Dog Saloon to see how much salmon and beer, and it only came, even with tip, to about $40. So she knew he paid for someone else's meal. I don't know if she dropped it after that, or maybe he lied and said he bought one of his co-workers' meals. Anyway, Shanann knew that that was bunkus. Also on the 12th, he took Cece and Bella to a friend's birthday party and was seen there all day laughing and having a good time at their birthday party. Later on, Chris Watts, through letters that people had wrote him that you can find on Reddit, just go to any of the Reddit, and I'll post a few below, any of the Reddit subreddits for Chris Watts, you can actually find letters that he writes to people, because he has a huge stan out there, a huge fan base that actually think the world of him, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them are going to be here attacking me once this goes up, that actually believe that he's innocent and was framed, and that Shanann was a master manipulator. So they write him in prison, and he tells them all kinds of stuff. There's lots of contradictions on those Reddits, but in one of them, he did say that the entire time he was at that birthday party, he was kind of in a trance and just thinking, this may be the last time I see my daughters. That's just creepy. It was also on the 12th that he sent Shanann a picture, the famous doll picture, which I'll insert here. Of a lifelike doll covered with a Twister map from the game Twister that the girls had put on a couch, and it looked like a dead body covered with a sheet. And he actually sent that to Shanann with no explanation, and she texts back, I'm not sure what to think about this. Of all the cases I've covered, this is definitely the creepiest thus far, and I've covered some satanic shit. So Chris texted Shanann a couple of times, although a lot of her calls and texts went unanswered when she was trying to contact him, and let him know that her plane was delayed. He didn't answer her. Finally, after 11:30 at night on the 12th, he finally texted Shanann and said, so sorry, I fell asleep on the couch. Neighbors would later say that they saw him bring the girls home from the birthday party, and later on, about 7:30, saw him grilling his dinner on the back deck, and then went inside and they didn't see him again. Supposedly he fell asleep on the couch and did not answer Shanann. Nikole drove herself and Shanann, Nikole Atkinson drove her and Shanann home from the airport, from the Denver airport, and dropped Shanann off in front of her house about 2 a.m. She asked Shanann to let her know how her doctor's appointment was, because Shanann had an appointment with her OB/GYN because she was having some blood sugar problems due to all the stress, I'm sure. And she saw Shanann walk up, punch in the code for the front door, and go inside, and their Ring doorbell camera shows the same thing, that she entered around 2 a.m. on early Monday, August 13th. And as we all know, that was the last time anyone ever saw Shanann Watts alive. I would say that the girls coming home from the birthday party was probably the last time anyone saw them alive outside of Chris Watts. Now, this is the hardest part for me. What happened after Shanann entered those doors? We know, because of the neighbor's camera, which we will get into the days after the killings about what happened, but we know from their neighbor's camera that Chris left the house around 5 a.m. on Monday the 13th. So something happened before 5 a.m. So again, because of letters he wrote to other people talking about what actually happened, we know that probably he had already attempted to kill his daughters. So probably between 11 p.m. and 5:15 is when all the killings actually happened. According to Chris Watts' letters on these subreddits, he attempted to smother both Bella and Cece with pillows before Shanann ever got home, and he thought he had accomplished it as they both weren't moving, but come to find out they were only knocked out, if you can believe a word Chris Watts says. Once Shanann came home, he greeted her. He immediately launched into, we need to separate, and basically a fight ensued, and Chris said that he gave his wife 𝐲𝐿𝐴 and strangled her with his two hands. So I don't know how he gave her the 𝐲𝐿𝐴, whether he shoved it, down her throat, or he crumbled it up, put it in water that she drank, or whatever, that he actually killed her on their bed in the master bedroom with his hands, choking her. He then realized that both 𝐶𝐶 and Bella were still alive. He said that he attempted to kill them so they would not see him kill their mother. He was still talking about how he was in some kind of blind rage while this was going on. So once he had done the deed with Shanann, he wrapped her in the top sheet or the bedspread of the bed, and he put her into his work truck. He backed the work truck, which later on a neighbor would say that was very unusual for him to do. He backed it up to the garage. It normally stayed on the street, and he loaded her body into it. He also put his tools for the day, and finally, he put Bella and 𝐶𝐶 in the back seat, no car seats, out of view of their mom. He covered up Mom so they wouldn't see her there. I'm sure those girls weren't stupid. They knew something was going on, even at that age. And he strapped them in and headed for 𝐼𝐸𝐸 Site 319 to go ahead and dispose of the body, because he knew he could dig a pit there. He took shovels. He took everything he needed. He was wearing baggy sweatpants and a baggy shirt and was carrying along his 𝐼𝐸𝐸 uniform. Once he got to the site, he drove way away from the wells, about 30 or 40 feet away from the wells. He dug a hole about 1 foot wide, 6 inches deep, and he put Shanann's body in it and covered her with dirt. I can only imagine he was thinking of coming back, because you don't adequately dispose of a body in 6 inches of dirt. So anyway, I swear if there's ever a murder in my small town, they're going to come at me, because I've said many times I could hide a body better than this person. But he puts her in, he buries her. Then he said he goes back to his truck, and it's time to dispose of the girls. He first smothers young 𝐶𝐶, 3 years old, with a blanket and takes her out to one of the oil wells and forces her down into the crude oil. He then comes back to the truck, according to him, and does the same thing to Bella. Now, Bella is said to have told him, "Daddy, please don't do to me what you just did to 𝐶𝐶." But he did. He smothered her with a blanket, and according to the autopsy on Bella, her roof of her mouth was pretty well jinged. She had wounds on her hands where she was evidently fighting for her life at 4 years old, and also had the flap that you have here under your tongue, as well as the one under your lip. Those were both split. So she was biting, fighting, slapping before she lost her life. He then takes her body to the other oil head and forces her. He had to force her through, because it was a very small opening. Part of her hair caught and remained on the top of the oil well. And that was later noted when they took both bodies out. Okay, now let's get into part 5, the timeline and the days after the crime. About 10:45 a.m., Nikole Atkinson and her son arrived at Shanann at the Watts home. Shanann was not answering phone calls or texts. She was scared that something had happened. She was texting Chris. She was texting Shanann, furiously trying to find out if anyone was there. She actually drove up with her son to the house and didn't see anything, didn't get anybody to the door. So she said, "I'm not going to panic. Maybe she's already on the way to the doctor's office." So her and her son left and actually went to her OBGYN's office to see if they could catch her there. Okay. So back with Chris, after he's done the deeds with his family, he's still on the work site in those dirty clothes that he just dug that hole with, when Cody Roberts and Melissa Parrish, also 𝐼𝐸𝐸 employees, pulled up at the job site just after 6 a.m. And Melissa Parrish and Cody both made notes that Chris was dressed in civilian clothes, non-work clothes, and had a shovel. It looked as though he had just been doing some stuff. His work truck was also pulled several feet away from the oil heads that he would be repairing. So they just thought it was weird. But Chris did change into his work clothes and head over to the oil heads to work on the oil leaks. Another thing that Melissa Parrish noticed is that Chris was uniquely neat. And whenever he worked on an oil leak or anything like that, he was very meticulous about cleaning up after himself, about cleaning up after the leak. None of that happened that day. She said he left oil on the ground. It was very unusual. He then, after fixing the leak, drove his work truck to a local gas station and bought a breakfast sandwich and coffee. All the time he's texting people. He's got Nikole starting to text him because she's worried about Shanann. He's got other things that he has to deal with as well as work texts. One of the first things he did about 8:45 was to call the girls' school, Primrose School of Erie, private preschool, and tell them he was withdrawing them because he and Shanann were splitting up and they were moving and didn't know where they would be. Shannan Meyer, who worked at the Primrose School, said, "That's very sad. I'm so sorry." He said, "Wait a minute, are they there yet?" Acting as if he didn't know they weren't going to be there. And she actually went and talked to one of the teachers and said, "No, they're not here today." He says, "We'll just withdraw them. We won't be sending them this year." And they, of course, asked, "Well, do you want us to keep them on the waiting list just in case you change your mind?" He said, "Sure, go ahead." Right after that, it was just after 9 o'clock, he called Ann Meadows, their realtor, who was surprised to hear from him. He never heard anyone. She never dealt with anyone but Shanann. He told her to go ahead and get the house on the market, that he and Shanann were splitting up and they were going to sell the house. He then called the resort in Aspen and canceled their trip set for the 17th. Meanwhile, Nikole, having gone to the OBGYN's office, noting that Shanann wasn't there, headed right back to the Watts house. She actually had the door code, so she used it and tried to open it up, but it was secured with the night chain, so you couldn't actually open it. She said she was able to see through and nothing looked out of place except the old flip-flops that Shanann wore everywhere were within view of the door. And she said unless Shanann was dressed up in like heels and stuff, she would have had those flip-flops on. So she was very upset. She actually pulled her car up close to the garage so that she could get up on the hood of her car and look into the garage, and she saw the white Lexus that Shanann had earned from Lavelle sitting there, and she knew something was wrong. She continued to text Chris. She tried to call him. He wouldn't answer, so she continued, "I'm worried about Shanann. Where is she?" And she said Chris would only text back, "She's with a friend." And it was just infuriating. It's like Nikole knew somewhere in her soul that something was wrong. So she called Sandy Ruzick, Shanann's mom, and asked her if she had heard from Shanann. And Sandy says, "No, I haven't, and I'm really worried because I had a premonition this morning." She said it was the Holy Spirit, because this is a deeply religious woman, had spoke Shanann's name to her in a whisper, and she said she had a cold chill shoot up the back of her spine, and she felt something was wrong. Please help her find her daughter. So Shanann texts Chris when he's not responding. She says, I'm calling the police." And Chris goes, No, don't call the police. Don't call the police." And Nikki pretty much said, "I'm calling the police, asshole." Also, another friend of theirs from Lavelle named Cassie was also starting to text Chris because Nikki had alerted everybody trying to find Shanann. So finally, Chris said, "I'm on my way home. Don't call the police." Well, Nikki went ahead and called the cops and Sandy around 1:30, saying she had got the police involved. And around 1:35, Officer 𝐝𝐞𝐭'𝐬, the first police officer on the scene, pulled up. And here I'm going to insert some footage from his body cam where he started to walk around the house to see if he could see anything, where he found no sign of any life in the house except for the Watts' dog barking from the inside.
Dropped her off at 2 o'clock this morning. She's 15 weeks pregnant. She wasn't feeling well, and she had a doctor's appointment this morning at 9, and I told her to let me know if she needed me to take her. She's got 2 little girls, and she was very distraught over the weekend, wasn't eating normally or drinking, and we kept trying to force it on her because she's pregnant. Her husband and her supposedly are separating, but she didn't know this. She thought they were just having issues. He disclosed that to me today. Because I called him and I was like, have you talked or heard from Shanann since she left for work this morning? Because I can't get a hold of her. I called, I texted. Her car's in the garage. Her shoes she wears every single day are right in the front door.
She only has one vehicle?
No, they only have the one vehicle in his work truck.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. There's not a
girl that went on a play date, but they're 4 and 2. She went on a play date. Why wouldn't she take in a car?
Finally, a few minutes later, after contacting Chris Watts, Officer Coonrod called him and said, do you know the code to the garage so that I can get into your house to do a welfare check? And, of course, Chris sat in pretty calm, saying, no, she's with a friend, but if you want to get in, you can't because the code doesn't work. So I'm on my way home. I'll be there in just a few minutes. So they start to wait, and eventually Chris does pull up, and here's a clip of what happened as soon as Chris Watts pulled up. You'll notice him go into the garage and immediately open Shanann's Lexus, take something out that we don't see, put it in his pocket, and then go into the house to open the door for Officer Coonrod.
Scott, how you doing? Good. So this is the only vehicle she would have?
Only one that
She would drive? Okay.
Meanwhile, you have a neighbor coming across that offered to let Officer Coonrod look at their security camera footage. It said would have caught everything that happened that morning. So Chris and Officer Coonrod go into the neighbor's house and watch the footage. The entire time they're there, Chris is gibbering jabbering about, very nervously about different things, and I'll insert some footage here.
What was out so far?
Is this on continually recording?
Yep. Well,
It's not, is it motion or is it? Okay, so it's motion. My detective just showed up, so he'll probably want to talk to you. He'd probably, like I said, he might have you call at the bank and see if there's any kind of activity.
because if there was any sort of action out there,
His cameras,
I would have got it.
like
Right.
we had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of like garages and stuff like that, and I had parked my truck
I had
here.
to park right here.
Yeah, so someone,
See if
I could see
anything
where someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver over there, and it was just like,
But if any action would have happened, any cars or anything left your house, I would
if
have
it would
got it.
have been like right in that area, it should have picked,
Oh, it'll pick up anything coming down the street this way.
you know where that tree there too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All right, appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks.
Hopefully something comes up here.
Mind if you just want to go talk to him? I'm going to get his info real quick. No.
And immediately after it's over, as you heard, the neighbor told Officer Coonrod that he was acting way weird. And he also almost never pulled back the truck in. It always stayed on the street. So eventually they go over back into the house, and Officer Coonrod starts to investigate the house. They noticed it was pretty clean, nothing really out of shape. They go upstairs, they check the closets. Chris actually, when they go into the closet, he asks Chris, is anything missing? And Chris looks around and says, I couldn't tell because she has so many clothes. I couldn't really tell if a little bit was missing. I don't see it. And then Chris...
Bag or anything?
There's and all that in the bottom, so it'd be kind of hard to tell if she took a little bit, or, I mean, it'd be easy to tell if she took a lot, but...
admits that they are, when Officer Coonrod asks Chris whether or not the marriage is good, he says, well, we're doing a separation, and he goes, well, how's that going? He goes, it's going, and I'll insert some more footage here.
Does she work?
Yeah, she works from home.
Oh, from home?
She works, this is her lifeline.
You guys have any kind of issues, marital issues, or?
We're going through separation.
You are? Did you guys file it yet or anything, or just talking?
No, we're gonna sell the house and do a separation.
Now, how's that going?
It's going
Civil for the most part, or?
As you can see, Chris actually found the wedding ring in the bedroom, brings that out, and by that time, he's actually called for detectives, and Detective David Baumhauer, Detective Mark James are there and start to question Chris. He refuses to let them do anything more without a warrant, and so they leave. So August 14th, you have the two detectives coming back with dogs and everything else and doing a thorough investigation of the house. One thing they do know is that the house smells entirely like bleach and cleaning products, that Chris had evidently done everything from washing the walls to vacuuming. The sheets that were on the bed with the missing bedspreads, those were found in the trash. It looked like they had makeup stains on them. So they found all that stuff in the trash. If he was wanting to clean up the house, I would think that he would burn them or something. But anyway, they start to talk to Chris, and he admits at that time that Shanann gave him no access to banking, so he wouldn't know if she was spending their money anywhere. And then they call Anadarko and basically get the GPS pulls of Chris's truck so they can see exactly where he was that day. Meanwhile, some friends of Chris's came over. Lauren, who was a high school friend of Shanann, who had actually also lived in Colorado, came in, as well as Amanda and Nick Thayer, some neighbors of them. They had met when they first bought the house. Came in, and both of them were kind of shocked when Chris told them that the marriage was dissolving. And the Thayers actually asked Chris if he wanted to stay with them, and he said, no, I just want to stay home. David Colon, a friend of Shanann and Chris's from Long Bay, came in. He talked to Chris. Chris told him about the marriage, and David says he wasn't actually surprised because even though he liked Shanann, he found her too controlling and even followed her on Facebook because of the huge amount of Thrive stuff she posted. He also said he always thought Chris's posts were weird and unmanlike. Come to find out, Shanann was doing those. And this is where we have that famous front porch interview by the local Denver station where Chris is shifting from foot to foot and just acting really weird. I won't insert any footage of that because we've all seen it 100 times, but all you have to do is Google Chris Watts front porch interview. You can see that in its entirety, but he was very shifty and very unbelievable to me in that interview. Finally, they take Chris downtown and interrogate him. He finally admits to an affair with Nikole. So they reach out to interview Nikole, and that's where they get all the information about Chris Watts and her relationship. Also, once contacted them, Nikole said that she told him she deleted a lot of stuff because she got mad at Chris when she read in the papers about the missing pregnant wife and kids. So still a lot of weirdness there. But finally, on the 15th, Chris breaks down under constant interrogation by the two detectives who aren't believing a word he says and says, we want to know the truth. Would you confess it to someone else? And he said, I want to talk to my dad. So they go out and they get Ronnie Watts, who's finally flown out to Colorado to be with his son. And they bring him into the interrogation room, and he confesses to killing his wife, though the excuse, and children. The excuse he gave is that Shanann killed the children, and he killed Shanann when he saw the children dead. And that's the story he gives his father, and that's the story he sticks with until much, much later when he confesses that he killed all three. The aftermath. Chris Watts pled guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, 2 for each of the children, because Colorado law charges you double time with murder if the child is under the age of 12. He got 1 count of first-degree murder on taking Shanann's life, and 1 count of unlawful termination of pregnancy in the death of little 𝐜𝐚𝐿. He also got 1 count of tampering with a dead body. Basically, he's serving about 4 life sentences and a 40-year sentence concurrently. He will never walk out of prison. He was put on suicide watch immediately after being taken into custody and solitary confinement because prisoners that hurt their families don't do so well. So he had a picture of his family and the Bible and nothing else. Of course, Cindy and Ronnie stand by their son, and they furnish him with commissary money. I'm sure it'll be in their will that he'll have a certain amount of commissary money. And from what we know, Chris Watts, though he's been transferred to Wisconsin for his safety, he's still living in solitary confinement, eating a lot of sweets and unhealthy food from the commissary. He's put on a lot of weight and is still kind of watched for his own safety. What happened to Nikole in late 2018, it was revealed that she had to leave the state of Colorado because as people found out more, not only did she delete all the stuff between her and Chris Watts from her phone, she was also found to have Googled things like how to do a book deal. Can I be held responsible for these murders? What happened to Lacey, in the Lacey Peterson case, Scott Peterson's mistress? She Googled what happened to her because she was really afraid for her own safety. And for her own safety, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation placed her in a witness protection program, changed her name, and moved her to a new job and a new life in another state. And she's out there. We'll probably never know. But so concludes the Watts case. It's still one of those that's just, anytime you have a family annihilator, and that's what anyone that wipes out their entire family is a family annihilator, there's always a wonder of why they did it. And those people tend to fit into one of 3 categories. Either they're just sadistic, somebody that is just total sociopathic and has no real feelings. I've seen a lot of reports that say Chris Watts is a sociopath and a psychopath. I don't know for sure. I haven't seen any actual, psychiatric evaluations for you, but that's what I've heard. So they either fall into that just really don't care, or they fall into the category of they see their family as a representation of their failures because they failed at their career or something like that. And then there's this type of killer that just sees the family as an obstacle to their true happiness. And I think that's where Chris Watts fell. I really do. Do I think it was a difficult marriage? Yes, for both of them. It was a very difficult marriage. And I don't think they would have lasted even if this hadn't happened. I think they were well on their way to divorce. I don't know how well that would have gone, and probably Chris saw, the financial ramifications of having to pay child support and alimony and all that stuff. So this was just a very tragic case, a case of 2 people that should never have gotten married. But sometimes we just don't know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Please support the channel. Links are down below. I really appreciate it. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. Until next time, 𝐲𝐿𝐻 out.